Well, greetings. Pastor Eric here with There Is More to the Story. We're on chapter 20. We're in time 20. We are on the resurrection of Jesus. We talked about that on Friday, about the empty stuff surrounding the resurrection of Jesus. On Sunday, we talked about the road to Emmaus, post-resurrection appearance of Jesus to the two disciples on the road to Emmaus. In the adult forum, we talked about the appearances of Jesus after the resurrection to the disciples on the beach. And today I'd like to talk with you a little bit about the appearance, post-resurrection appearance of Jesus to Thomas and what we can learn from Thomas. Thomas doubting Thomas. Remember the story. I'll refresh your memory about that in just a moment. But as we think about Thomas, think about doubt and the role of doubt in the life of a believer that sometimes has doubts. I mean, you sometimes wonder, how did Jesus walk on the water? How did God appear in a burning bush? How did Jesus rise from the dead? How did all of this stuff happen? And sometimes I think it's not helpful when kids have questions about faith, or when people have doubts, or when people kind of wonder the big picture. How does God create the world out of nothing? Sometimes people say, well, you just have to have faith. You just have to have faith. Just accept it by faith. You know, when people are struggling with understanding things or struggling with deep issues of life and someone says, just have faith, I don't think that that is too helpful. I think it's kind of a cop-out. I'd rather say, you know, that's something I struggle with too. I wonder about that too, rather than say, oh, just have faith. Because if you're going through a huge financial crisis in life and somebody says, oh, just have faith, you'll make it through. You think, okay, what does it mean to have faith to make it through that? You're going through a disaster in your marriage, a health issue. You wake up in the middle of the night with those cold sweats and somebody says, just have faith. I mean, it's like when you break your leg and somebody says, oh, just don't hurt. Well, life doesn't always work that way. It's not that you don't have to have faith. You do need to have faith, but it's almost more important to say, well, or look at the Bible and think, how do I have faith? How do I get that faith? Because the Bible has a lot to say about doubt. Jesus talked to the disciples on the road to Emmaus, and he says, why do doubts arise in your heart? I mean, doubt is a natural part of what it means to believe, to kind of question some of those things, because doubt is a healthy, maybe, response to the next step of faith, kind of going through that doubt phase. Thomas went through that. Remember, a couple days after Jesus was crucified and risen, the disciples were all in the upper room. There were 10 of them gathered in the upper room. Judas, of course, was gone. And, of course, Thomas was gone. Thomas, who knows where he was? Maybe he was out, getting pizza at Pizza Hut. Maybe he was depressed. Maybe whatever it was. Maybe he was confused. At the very least, he wasn't there. Thomas had spent quite a bit of time with Jesus, of course, enjoying some amazing times with him. They traveled together, they worshiped together, they spent time together, but he wasn't with those 10 disciples who were in the upper room that time after Jesus had been crucified and then risen. So when Thomas got back to the upper room after the 10 disciples went and got him, he told them about what happened. Thomas said, unless I can put my hand where the nails were and my hand in his side, I will not believe. The other disciples said, just have faith. Thomas said, unless I see this, I will not believe. So Thomas really makes two, what you might call faith mistakes in that. His first mistake was making his own requirements for faith. unless I see, I'm not going to believe. Silly Thomas, but sometimes silly us. I mean, I think sometimes we make requirements for believing. Unless I get this happening in my life, I'm not going to believe. Unless every Christian I believe is a perfect Christian, I'm not going to be like one of those hypocrites. I won't join the church. Unless God runs the world the way that I wish God would run the world, I'm not going to really believe. We sometimes do the same kind of thing, make our requirements of God. God, we serve God in an advisory capacity. God, if I were you, I would do this. Well, Thomas also made a second mistake. He said, unless I see and experience those things, I will not believe. I will not have faith. He chose not to believe. He made that choice not to believe. He willed himself not to believe. Unless I see these, I'm not going to believe. And the Christian faith is not just a head decision. It's not just a heart feeling, but it's really both. Of course, it's head, it's logical, linear, it's intellectual. Of course, it's heart, it's feeling. It is. It's a matter of the will. It's a matter of the heart and soul and spirit. You follow what your head and your heart say when you follow Christ, instead of making your own condition, which I think we sometimes do. So Thomas, when Jesus came to him and showed him his hands and his feet, Thomas said, "My Lord and my God." And that really is the loftiest confession of Jesus in the Gospels. My Lord and my God, Thomas says. So, in a sense, he wasn't with the disciples. He was a long ways away. Unless my requirements for faith are met, I ain't going to believe. But then he goes through that experience and says, my Lord and my God. So, when you have doubts, recognize that you're in good company with Thomas and with many other people through the ages. But here's maybe a couple of ways to remove your doubts. Doubts are not bad, but sometimes you have to get past doubt in order to have a vibrant, living faith. One way is to maybe formulate your doubts, kind of get them into words and write them down on a piece of paper. Put it in a place where only you can see them. Maybe don't share them with anybody, but just at least write them down. Write down the doubts. Maybe number them. And then at the bottom of the page, write, Jesus, give me faith because these doubts are very real for me. And if you wrote those down, if you write those down, read through them every once in a while, and then read the prayer at the bottom, Jesus, give me faith because these doubts are really real. Read through the doubts again and again, and then read, Jesus, give me faith because my doubts are very real. I think if you say that and pray for faith about those doubts, Jesus will help you overcome those. Second, maybe in terms of overcoming doubts, think of redirecting your will. Remember that Thomas said, I will not believe, as a statement of the will, until he finally met Jesus and he said, my Lord and my God. Maybe if there are things you struggle with, maybe you just don't know what to do, maybe you kind of waver around in what you believe in your heart, maybe if you're wondering and doubting all that stuff, redirect your will, your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and say, I want to believe, I want to believe, I want to, and just kind of keep repeating that. Redirect your heart, soul, mind, and strength to love God and serve God. Make a conscious commitment. Thomas said, I will not believe, and then he said, my Lord and my God, and his will was redirected. So consider finding some way to redirect your will. And third, like Thomas, he was away from the other disciples on a pizza run. Then he gets back with the disciples. He sees Jesus when he's hanging out with other disciples. When he's hanging out, Jesus appeared. Remember that he had left that faithful band of other disciples at 10, had left and gone someplace else. But when he got back together with them and Jesus appeared, then his heart, soul, mind, and strength was united with them, and he was able to see Jesus and get those doubts out of his head and get everything, his heart, soul, mind, and strength, filled with faith. So think of the importance of hanging out with other believers at church in order to have a strong and vital faith. That's one of the big lessons Thomas learned, because the longer you stay away from being with other believers, the more doubt starts to creep into your mind. But when you regularly go to church and hang out with other believers, you are filled with their faith that exudes to you and you to them. In the company of believers, we're able to not always overcome, but take steps to overcome our faith. So consider writing those doubts down, praying about them, that they're very real, and ask Jesus to take them from you. Or redirect your heart, soul, mind, and strength to believing. Or third, hang out with other believers at church, at wherever it might be. Hang out with other believers, and you'll be able to not doubt, and you'll be able to focus your faith a little bit more. We have the journeys of Paul that we're talking about next week. It'll be a great couple of weeks spending time in the ministry of Paul, and then we end up in Revelation on June 4th, and then we go into another 12 verses that every Christian should know by heart this summer. Great to spend this time with you. Hope to see you soon, and until then, you take care. Bye-bye.